The first time Professor Laurel Whitmore humiliated him, the whole lecture hall erupted in laughter. It wasn't the kind of laughter that comes from joy. It was sharp, cold, designed to cut a man down to size. And even though Holden Walker tried to keep his face blank, even though he swallowed hard and pretended it didn't sting, something inside him cracked just a little deeper that day. It was 7:42 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the University of New England campus was still waking up. Students rushed across the courtyard wrapped in hoodies, backpacks bouncing against their shoulders as they hurried toward the ivy-covered mathematics building. Inside, the marble floors glistened because Holden had finished mopping them only minutes earlier. He pushed his cart toward the supply closet, hoping to slip out unseen before the morning lecture began. But fate didn't care about his timing. Fate wanted him in that room. The moment he stepped past the door, Professor Laurel's voice sliced through the air. "Excuse me," she snapped, her tone dripping with annoyance. "Are the hallways so clean you decided to wander into my classroom?" Students snickered. Holden froze. He hadn't meant to interrupt. He was simply passing through. "Sorry, ma'am," he murmured, lowering his gaze, just putting the mop away. Laurel raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, the kind that said she'd never scrubbed anything in her life. "Well, while you're here, perhaps you can solve this." She tapped the chalkboard behind her, where an equation sprawled across the entire board. It was messy, chaotic, unnecessarily complicated, like most things Laurel did to look impressive. Gasps spread across the room. A janitor solving an upper division mathematical physics problem? Impossible, unthinkable, entertaining. Laurel folded her arms. "Come on, then. I'm sure your cleaning expertise will help." More laughter. Holden's jaw tightened. The pain he carried every day, the late bills, the long nights at the hospital, the fear of losing Hazel, all of it pressed against his ribs. He wanted to walk away. He wanted to avoid attention altogether. But something in the equation tugged at him. He recognized the structure instantly because he had once derived it himself during a graduate seminar. He stepped forward slowly. Laurel smirked, expecting disaster. But instead of touching the chalk, Holden simply stared at the board. He scanned line by line, mentally rearranging terms, simplifying expressions, stripping away the unnecessary theatrics she'd added just to look brilliant. The room went silent when he quietly said, "The left side collapses if you apply Green's divergence identity correctly." Laurel blinked. "What?" Holden pointed to the bottom half of the board. "You don't need all this. The integral transforms naturally. The closed form is just -2. A ripple of shock tore across the room. Students leaned forward, stunned. Laurel grabbed the chalk, rewriting the expressions. Her hand shook slightly as the math reduced exactly as Holden said. When the final line appeared, she froze. -2, exactly as he'd said, without touching the chalk. The lecture hall erupted again, this time not in laughter, but disbelief. Laurel's cheeks flushed a deep red. That was to guess. Holden shook his head. Math doesn't work on guesses. Her embarrassment transformed into anger, so quickly you could almost see the emotional whiplash. "Get out," she hissed, "and stay out of my classroom." He nodded and backed away, pushing his cart toward the door. But as he turned, he caught sight of the students' faces, wide-eyed, fascinated, whispering. Their expressions followed him down the hallway, but none of them knew what solving that equation had cost him emotionally, because only minutes later, when he stepped outside into the damp morning air, he felt the past dragging him backward, and the first flashback ripped open. It hit him in the courtyard, Hazel's laughter echoing in his memory, her small hand gripping his as they walked to the Columbia University campus years ago. Back then, he wasn't mopping floors. He wasn't hiding a brilliant mind under cheap uniforms and exhaustion. He had been Dr. Holden Walker, or at least on the brink of becoming one, a rising mathematician, a prodigy, a husband with dreams, and a daughter on the way. Professors fought to advise him. His dissertation had been called once-in-a-generation work. Then Hazel's heart condition struck like lightning. The memory flooded him without mercy. The sterile hospital lights, the surgeon explaining the cost of treatment, the way his wife Sydney's face crumpled under pressure until finally, heartbreakingly, she chose to leave. He became a single father overnight. He abandoned his dissertation the next day, and he took the janitor job the week after because it was the only job with overnight hours that let him stay at the hospital. The flashback ended with a single image. Hazel, frail but smiling, asking him if he would be home that night. He always said yes. He rarely meant it. The present returned sharply when cold rain hit his face. He inhaled, grounding himself. He had no time for humiliation. Hazel had a cardiology appointment today. He needed to be strong for her. He walked across Cambridge, the morning bustle blurring around him, electric scooters zipping past, coffee carts steaming, students rushing into lecture buildings while construction crews hammered across the street. Red brick apartments lined the sidewalks. Old Boston-style street lamps flickered as cars rolled by on Massachusetts Avenue. Inside the hospital, Hazel sat on the exam bed swinging her legs, a bright pink headband keeping her curly blonde hair out of her eyes. Her smile alone could lift a collapsing world. Holden knelt beside her, squeezing her small hand. "Dad," she whispered, "did you solve another big math thing today?" Holden chuckled softly. Something like that, sweetheart. Hazel's cardiologist walked in holding a clipboard. "Mr. Walker, her numbers aren't good. The surgery cannot be delayed much longer." Holden nodded, his throat thickening. He had already heard this. Too many times. The cost? $128,000 up front. More than he could make in 5 years of cleaning hallways and mopping lecture floors. But he nodded anyway, because Hazel needed strength, not despair. Later, as they walked home to the street of Cambridge, Hazel looked up and said, "I wish your old school knew how smart you are." Holden's heart twisted. She had no idea. No idea what he'd given up. No idea how brilliant he once was. No idea how much the world had changed him. That night, after he tucked her into bed, he sat at the tiny kitchen table in their small, aging apartment, the dim light flickering over stacks of overdue bills. Rain tapped the window like a relentless metronome. His mop and bucket leaned against the wall, reminding him the world saw him as nothing more. He inhaled shakily. His hands trembled slightly. And then another flashback slammed into him. This time, it was the day Sydney left. The argument, the exhaustion, her breaking under the weight of Hazel's medical bills, her saying she couldn't live like this, her walking out the door while Hazel slept in the next room. Holden had stood motionless for hours after she left, staring at the empty hallway, listening to the rain fall outside. That moment had built the man he was today, tired, grieving, determined. He wiped a tear from his cheek and opened the old math notebook he kept hidden beneath the bills. It contained pieces of the dissertation he abandoned, proofs he'd worked on during his Cambridge years, equations written with hope and ambition. He stared at the equations long enough to feel the past bleeding back into him. But this time, the pain didn't weaken him. It sharpened him. Because deep down, Holden knew that solving that equation in Laurel's class wasn't just humiliation turned upside down. It was the beginning of something shifting, something waking up, something he thought he buried forever. As he drifted to sleep at the kitchen table, his head resting on unpaid bills, a single truth pulsed in the background of his exhausted mind. The world had not seen the last of Holden Walker, And for first time in years, the thought made his heart beat with something dangerously close to hope. The rumor reached Laurel before lunch. By 11:30, the story of the janitor who had corrected her equation had already traveled from the math building to the student union, to the library, and into group chats she wasn't supposed to see. She sat behind her glass-walled office on the third floor, staring out over the Cambridge skyline as rain streaked slow paths down the windows. Her framed degrees from Princeton and MIT hung behind her like a jury. Her teaching assistant, Tessa, stood nervously near the door, clutching a stack of graded problem sets. "It's all over TikTok," Tessa muttered before she could stop herself. Laurel's eyes snapped away from the window. "What is—" Tessa swallowed. "The, janitor. The equation. Someone recorded it. People are saying he—" "Guess." Laurel cut in sharply. "He guessed a number and happened to be right. That's all." She reached for her coffee, hiding the small shake in her hand. "Advanced mathematics doesn't come from mops and buckets, Tessa. It comes from years of disciplined study." Tessa nodded quickly, though her eyes flickered with doubt. "Of course, Professor Whitmore." After she left, silence swallowed the office again. Laurel minimized the grading software and pulled up the campus news feed. There was, front and center, a blurry video of a man in a Navy maintenance polo staring at her chalkboard. You couldn't see his face clearly, but his voice was unmistakable. "You don't need all this. The integral transforms naturally. The closed form is just -2. Her own image stood there in the frame, frozen, staring at the chalk after rewriting it. The microsecond of shock on her face had been captured in crisp HD. The caption underneath read, "When the janitor outmathed the professor's skull." The comments burned. How did he see it that fast? Dude sounds smarter than half the faculty. Pay that man more. Imagine mopping floors with brain like that. Laurel clicked out a browser. So fast her hand jolted. She stood up abruptly and paced the length of her office, heels tapping against the hardwood. This isn't about him, she told herself. It's about standards, about the system, about order. She closed her eyes, and for a brief moment, a flashback flared. Manhattan, 12 years earlier, a younger Laurel in a sleek black dress standing at a conference podium. Applause thundered after her talk on nonlinear operators. A Nobel laureate shook her hand and said, "You see, structure most of us miss. You're going to be a star." She had lived on that sentence for years, built her identity around it, built her career around it. Now here she was, shaking because a man with a mop had seen a structure she hadn't. She opened her eyes and forced her shoulders straight. No, she wasn't about to let a TikTok clip rewrite her story. By the time her afternoon lecture began, the seats were packed. Students who weren't even enrolled in her class squeezed into the back rows and aisles, phones ready, eyes brimming with anticipation. It didn't feel like a lecture. It felt like a trial. Holden arrived 5 minutes before start time, pushing his cart along the back wall. He wasn't supposed to be there. This wasn't his time slot. But the regular morning crew had called out, and facilities had sent him to clean before the evening colloquium. He was planning to keep his head down, clean the coffee stains, wipe the marker dust off the front tables, pretend the morning incident had never happened. But the buzz in the room made that impossible. Whispers floated through the auditorium. "That's him. The janitor. I heard he used to be some genius or something. Bet she kicks him out again." Laurel stepped up to the podium, dressed in a tailored navy suit, blonde hair pinned in a flawless chignon. Her expression was smooth, controlled. But when her eyes flicked toward the back and found Holden, a shadow crossed her face. "Welcome," she began, voice calm, amplified through the hall speakers. "It seems today's topic has attracted wider interest than usual." A few students chuckled, Good, she continued, because we'll be discussing something that separates real mathematical maturity from surface-level tricks. She turned to the board and began to write. At first, the symbol seemed simple, a trigonometric integral, an analytic expression, something any advanced undergrad might recognize. But layer by layer, she built it into a wall of symbols, long and intimidating. This, she said, stepping aside, is a baseline test. Anyone who wishes to be taken seriously in upper-level analysis should be able to handle this. Anyone who can't should reconsider their ambitions. Students bent over their notebooks quickly. Pens scratched. Calculators clicked. Some worked in hushed pairs, others alone, glancing between their notes and the board. In the back of the room, Holden rested his hands on the cart handle, eyes drawn against his will toward the equation. He didn't want to engage. The morning had been enough chaos for a week. All he wanted was to finish cleaning, go home to Hazel, and pretend the day hadn't cracked open old parts of himself. But the structure on the board pulled him in. He saw symmetry. He saw cancellation. He saw a way through and half the work. He swallowed hard. Don't do it again. Just stay quiet. But the longer he watched, the more wrong Laurel's framing felt. Not the math, the message, the division, the gatekeeping, the implication that this world was reserved for a certain class of people. He thought of Hazel asking, "I wish your old school knew how smart you are." He thought of unpaid bills. He thought of Sydney walking out the door, and something in him said, "Enough." Laurel walked down the aisle, peering over shoulders and nodding when students arrived at the standard solution. When she returned to front, most had finished. "Excellent," she said. "This is the level of basic mastery we expect. Now let's—" "There's a simpler way," a voice said quietly. The words weren't loud, but they cut through the hall like a knife. Every head turned toward the back. Holden felt hundreds of eyes slam into him. His throat tightened. It was too late to take it back. Laurel's stare was icy. "I'm sorry." He took a breath. "There's a more elegant approach. Using symmetry. It takes half the effort." A hush fell over the room. Phones lifted. Some students were already recording. Laurel's jaw tensed. "By all means," she said, lips curling. "Enlighten us." Holden stepped away from the cart, walking down the side aisle. His maintenance polo and worn sneakers looked wildly out of place among Patagonia fleeces and MacBooks. But something about the way he carried himself, shoulders grounded, steps steady, made even the students who'd come to laugh fall strangely quiet. He picked up a piece of chalk. For a moment, the white dust felt unfamiliar in his fingers. But then his body remembered. Late nights at Columbia, lecturing to a small group of peers. Teaching sessions with undergrads who stayed after class. Scribbling ideas on boards until the cleaning crew kicked him out. Funny, he thought, how the roles had reversed. He began to write. He didn't flood the board with equations. He erased half of what was there and rewrote the integral in a simplified form. He drew a small coordinate axis, sketched a symmetric curve. He circled mirrored regions. "Most of you attacked this with brute force," he said, voice calm, carrying easily across the hushed space. "But if you notice the function symmetry, the integral collapses. You don't need all the heavy machinery." He finished with 2 crisp lines and underlined the final expression. Same answer as the students. "But now," he added softly, "you can see the structure, not just the result." Several students leaned forward unconsciously. Someone whispered, "Whoa." Tessa's eyes were bright, her phone forgotten in her hand. For a suspended second, even Laurel seemed impressed. Then the moment passed, and the fury underneath her pride surged back like a wave. Scattered applause began in the back row. Laurel shut it down with a single sharp look. Her heels clicked against the stage as she strode forward. "Cute," she said. "A party trick." Holden blinked. "It's not a trick. It's a trick," she repeated. "Pretty lines on a board do not make someone a mathematician. Real understanding comes from formal training, rigorous coursework, years in the field, not cleaning between lectures." Laughter rippled again. This time it was uncomfortable. Holden's stomach twisted. He could have backed down, could have nodded, mumbled an apology, gone back to his cart, and let her reclaim control. But she stepped closer, eyes gleaming with something sharper than annoyance, something like fear. "You really think you belong in this space?" she asked, voice dropping, amplified by the microphone so the entire hall could hear. "You really think your intuition," she practically spat the word, "is on par with people who devote their lives to this?" He held her gaze. "I think mathematics cares about truth, not resumes." A few people murmured approvingly. That did it. Something in Laurel snapped. The conference compliment she lived on, the image of that TikTok clip, the whispers in faculty meetings, her own buried insecurity that maybe, just maybe, her brilliance was not as untouchable as she claimed. All of it collided. "Fine," she said suddenly, turning back to the board. She grabbed a fresh piece of chalk and dragged it hard against the slate. This time, the equation she wrote wasn't textbook. It wasn't a standard exam trick. It was dense, wild, something pulled straight out of her own research in nonlinear analysis. Symbols filled the board, pushing down, then across, until not an inch remained clean. Students stared in open-mouthed horror. Tessa's eyebrows shot up. Even the grad students in the back row shifted uncomfortably. Laurel underlined the final term and turned with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "This," she announced, her voice smooth and deadly, "is not an integral exercise. This is real mathematics. The kind that took me 3 months during my postdoc to crack. If you're so confident, Mr. Walker," she let his last name drop with a hint of disdain. "Solve this," she said, each word a challenge hurled across the room, "and I'll marry you." The hall exploded. "What? Yo, what did she just say? No way. She's insane." Holden stared at her, stunned. He hadn't expected that. Not the fake proposal, not the public spectacle, not the way her voice wrapped the dare in poison and mockery. "That's inappropriate," someone muttered. "What afraid?" Laurel purred, tilting her head. "You want to play at being a mathematician? Then play on our field. Or push your cart back out into the hallway and stay in your lane." Holden's heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat. He looked at the board. At first, the symbols blurred. His brain, still reeling from humiliation, refused to focus. "You don't belong here. You're a janitor. You have a sick kid at home and a fallen life and a stack of bills. This isn't your world anymore." But then, beneath the panic, the old muscle memory stirred. He began recognizing pieces. A familiar operator, a variational structure, a hint of the methods he'd used in his unfinished dissertation. He stepped closer to the board. Laurel's smile widened. Students' phones were up again, streaming live. TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, everywhere. He could already see the captions in his mind. "Janitor fails on impossible equation. Professor ends a career. Stay in your lane, bro." His hands felt numb. Chalk was suddenly heavy. "This is insane," he thought. "She's setting you up. You could walk away. No one expects you to actually try." But at the same time, another voice whispered from somewhere deeper. "You've lost too much already. Don't lose yourself, too." He picked up the chalk. A collective breath sucked in from the seats. For 30 seconds, Holden didn't write a single symbol. He just stared, eyes moving slowly from top to bottom, left to right, tracing structure, stripping away ornamentation, looking for the heart of the problem. Around him, time seemed to distort. The students vanished. Laurel faded. The cameras, the phones, the whispers, all of it blurred. It was just him and the mathematics again. Somewhere in the back row, a student whispered, "Is he actually going to try?" On the second row, Tessa whispered, more to herself than anyone, "Please, let him win." Holden inhaled once, deeply. Then, finally, he moved. The first line of his solution hit the board like the opening move in a championship game. And the entire room leaned forward, caught in the gravity of the moment, not realizing that what was happening in front of them would drag the entire university, and eventually the entire country, into a storm bigger than anyone in that room could possibly imagine. Holden's chalk made the faintest tapping sound as he wrote the second line. It wasn't much, just a re-expression of boundary term, but the air inside the auditorium changed. It tightened, thickened. Students leaned so far forward some sat on the edge of their seats. Phones, hundreds of them, were raised like glowing perches ready to capture history or humiliation. Professor Laurel Whitmore stood completely still beside the podium, knuckles whitening around the marker she held. She had expected him to freeze. She had expected him to choke. She had expected him to melt under the weight of an equation ripped directly from her postdoctoral research at Princeton. But the calm, deliberate way Holden Walker began rearranging her terms made her heart rate spike, so suddenly she felt a pulse in her throat. "He's guessing," she told herself. "He must be." But the elegance in the way he canceled the first operator made that lie harder to swallow. Across the hall, Tessa kept her phone down for once, hands clasped over her mouth. She knew math well enough to understand what he was doing. And more importantly, she understood what he wasn't doing. He wasn't fumbling. He wasn't acting out of place. He wasn't performing a fluke trick. He was thinking like a mathematician, a real one. Holden didn't hear the whispers or see the recording phones. He didn't notice the way a dozen students had abandoned their notes entirely. He barely registered Laurel's stiff posture behind him, because as the lines built, as the symbols flowed, the mathematics began to pull something deeper out of him. His mind slipped once again into a flashback, not of pain this time, but of purpose. He was at Columbia University 7 years earlier, in a small graduate seminar room smelling faintly of old chalk and fresh coffee. His advisor, Dr. Marchand, a brilliant, notoriously demanding professor, paced slowly behind him as he worked. The board was covered in nonlinear functional operators, dense, almost unreadable to anyone not steeped in the field. But to him, it had been like music. "You see structure instinctively, Holden," Martian had said, watching him reshape terms. "Where most students memorize pathways, you carve your own. That is rare. Don't lose it." He hadn't lost it. Life had simply buried it. The flashback blurred into the present as Holden's eyes sharpened on the board. He underlined a key transformation and took a small step back. Gasps fluttered through the room. "What did he just do?" someone whispered. "That's actually valid," another murmured. "Oh my God, he's collapsing the operator." Laurel's stomach sank. His third line wasn't just correct. It was beautiful. No. This cannot be happening. She forced herself to speak. "You skipped a necessary verification step." Holden looked at her calmly. "I'll get to it. But the symmetry collapses the need for the extended path, at least in this instance." Students glanced between them like spectators at a championship match. Laurel stepped forward. "You think you can simplify my work? Work that took me months." Holden set the chalk down briefly, hands resting against the edge of the table. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. "I think mathematics belongs to anyone who understands it." The room inhaled sharply. Laurel froze. Her lips tightened. Her pride, her reputation. the identity she had built like armor. This man was cracking it in front of a live audience. Holden turned back to the board, and then, suddenly, everything in him stuttered. The path forward blurred. The elegant structure he had envisioned twisted into something hazy. A fog of panic rolled over him. His fingers trembled. His breath hitched. His mind, uninvited, dragged him into another flashback. This one wasn't kind. Hazel, 4 years old, small, too pale, lie in a hospital bed with tubes taped to her chest. The monitor beeped steadily beside her. He remembered sitting in the stiff hospital chair, his head in his hands. The cardiologist's voice echoed from that day. If we wait too long for the surgery, Mr. Walker, you need to prepare yourself for the worst. His wife, Sydney, had stood in the corner crying silently, her hand covering her mouth. She had looked at Holden then with eyes reflecting hopelessness, guilt, and something else. Something that grew over time until it finally broke her. The flashbacks sharpened into the moment she said the words that would haunt him. I can't stay anymore. Holden, I can't live in fear like this. I can't survive this. He had begged. He had cried. He had failed. The chalk almost slipped from his hand. Students leaned forward again, this time sensing his hesitation. He's stuck. She got him. There's no way he can finish. Laurel's confidence slithered back across her features as she stepped closer to the board. It's all right, she said, smiling sweetly, but her voice carried venom. It's understandable. You're out of your depth. The words hit Holden harder than she expected, not because of the insult, but because he had said those exact words to himself too many nights in a row. He stared at the board, at the impossible problem, at the life he used to have, at the life he now lived. His chest tightened. But then, a voice cut through the fog. Holden, calm, gentle, familiar. It was Professor Marchand, not in the room, but in his memory. Return to fundamentals when you panic. Breathe. Strip the problem to its bones. You always overcomplicate when you're afraid. His shaky breath softened. The panic loosened. The fog cleared. Holden picked up the chalk again. The classroom went silent enough to hear the rain tapping against the windows. Slowly, with bold confidence returning to his hands, he circled a hidden symmetry Laurel had overlooked. Then he drew a substitution pathway, simple, elegant, and devastatingly effective, and connected it to the earlier transformation. One by one, the lines fell into place. Students stood from their seats without realizing it. Whispers evaporated. Phones zoomed in. Laurel's heartbeat thundered in her ears. No, she whispered, but her own eyes confirmed it. He wasn't just solving her equation. He was improving it. Holden stepped back on the board, breathing hard. Chalk dust smudged across his fingers. The final expression rested in perfect clarity on the slate. A single student said it first, barely above a whisper. He did it. Another echoed. He actually solved it. Then the flood. Holy crap. No way. This guy is insane. That was beautiful. He's a janitor? This guy? Holden stared at the board, chest rising and falling. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't triumphant. He was simply present, living a version of himself he thought had died when Hazel first got sick. But the moment wasn't over. Laurel took a step forward. Her heels clicked loudly in the silence. She stared at the board, eyes scanning every symbol, every transformation, every stroke. Her hands trembled. This isn't possible, she whispered. Holden's voice softened. It's just math. No, she said, louder now, turning toward him, voice cracking with emotion she did not understand. This technique, this structure, I've only ever seen one person use it. It was during my postdoc, a young researcher, Walker, Holden Walker. Students gasped. Holden's face didn't change. He simply waited. Quiet. Still. Laurel's breath hitched as she whispered the truth aloud. You're him. The hall exploded again, but this time not in chaos. In awe, gasps, screams, disbelief, phones shaking from adrenaline. That's the guy who was supposed to finish the Columbia Fellowship. He disappeared. Everyone thought he left academia. What the hell is he doing mopping floors? No freaking way. Laurel stumbled backward, shaking her head. But you vanished. You had funding. You had awards. You were going to be the next big name. What happened to you? Holden didn't answer. Not yet. Not here. Instead, he looked at the board once more, then back to her. You made a promise, he said quietly. The room froze. Laurel's eyes widened with horror. The dare. Solve it, and I'll marry you. Students erupted in laughter, cheers, screams, and chants. Marry him. Marry him. You said it. You said it. She's doomed. Walker for president. Laurel turned bright red, waving her hands. I didn't mean that was rhetorical. A joke. Holden raised an eyebrow. You didn't say that. The students howled. Laurel felt her world collapsing. Her pride, her authority, everything she'd built to protect herself from failure. And now the person exposing her wasn't a rival professor. It was the man she humiliated. She opened her mouth to argue, but a voice boomed from the back of the hall. Professor Whitmore, it said, clipped in cold, "You will explain yourself." Immediately, the crowd parted. Dean Hawthorne entered with 3 senior faculty members. His expression was severe. Behind him, a small woman in a black trench coat stepped into the light. She wore dark-rimmed glasses, a sleek bun, and a quiet confidence that radiated power. Several students recognized her instantly. Oh my God! That's Evelyn Ashbourne. The billionaire philanthropist? What is she doing here? Laurel paled. Holden froze. Everything shifted, because Evelyn Ashbourne didn't just fund the university. She owned half of it, and she was staring directly at Holden Walker with a look he hadn't seen in years. Recognition, and something like hope. For a moment, no one in the auditorium breathed. Evelyn Ashbourne, the billionaire whose name graced half the buildings on campus, stood in the doorway like a quiet storm. Small in stature, powerful in presence, sharp-eyed behind her dark glasses. Students parted instinctively respectful. Even the dean's voice softened. "Ms. Ashbourne," he said, clearing his throat, "we didn't expect." "I'm aware," she replied, her tone cool but not unkind. "I was on campus for a trustees' meeting when I heard a professor offered marriage as a condition for solving a mathematical challenge." She paused, leveling her gaze at Laurel, "and that it was solved by one of our janitorial staff." She turned her attention back to Holden, her head tilting just slightly, or rather, by someone pretending to be janitorial staff. Holden felt heat rise in his face. He wasn't pretending. He had needed the job, needed the paycheck, needed Hazel to survive. But he understood her implication. Laurel swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "Ms. Ashbourne, this is a misunderstanding. A joke, taken out of context. He disrupted my class." Evelyn lifted a hand gently, silencing her. "I saw the clip, Professor Whitmore. I saw how you spoke to him, and I've now seen the work he produced on your board." She walked slowly to the front of the auditorium, heels clicking softly against the floor. She stopped beside Holden. "Do you know how long I've been looking for you?" Holden blinked. "Looking for me?" A ripple of shock spread across the students. Even the dean stiffened. Evelyn nodded. "Years ago, I reviewed the annual Columbia Research Summit. Your unfinished dissertation was submitted in draft form, a partial document. Her expression softened just slightly. It was extraordinary. The committee practically begged you to return. Her voice lowered. Then you vanished. Holden's throat tightened. He stared at the floor. Life got in the way. Evelyn studied him for a moment, really studied him, as if peeling back every layer he had buried. Yes, she murmured. It often does. She stepped forward and addressed the dean. I want a full inquiry into what happened here, and I want to speak with Mr. Walker in private. Students gasped again. Laurel's legs wobbled beneath her. But Evelyn didn't wait for an answer. She simply turned and walked toward the double doors. Mr. Walker, follow me. Holden hesitated. Then he wiped the chalk dust from his hands and followed her out. The murmurs behind him erupted instantly. He's getting hired. She's going to sponsor him. He's going to be famous. What a plot twist, bro, what? Laurel sank into her chair, face pale. Her mind spun. Her authority, her reputation, her pride, shattered in front of hundreds of students. But the humiliation wasn't the worst part. It was a realization that she had just been publicly corrected by the one mathematician whose work she had studied obsessively during her postdoc, a man she had unknowingly insulted, belittled, and mocked in front of an entire hall, and the sting of knowing she deserved it. Holden followed Evelyn into a quiet conference room overlooking the rain-washed Cambridge skyline. She closed the door gently, then gestured for him to sit. He didn't. He remained standing, hands in his pockets, unsure what to do. She studied him for another long moment. You worked out her operator in 2 minutes, a problem that took her months. Holden shrugged. It was familiar. You invented half of that framework, she corrected softly. He swallowed hard. That was a long time ago. And yet, she said, you're still carrying it, still thinking in structures most researchers don't see. You didn't lose your gift, Mr. Walker. You hid it. He looked away, jaw tightening. I had reasons. Evelyn didn't push. Instead, she asked quietly, your daughter, Hazel, correct? Holden's breath caught. How do you? I do my homework, she said simply. I know she needs heart surgery. I know the cost. I know you've been working double shifts. And I know you abandoned your doctoral work to care for her. His eyes watered instantly, an involuntary, sharp reaction he fought to suppress. She's all I have. And you, Evelyn said gently, are all she has. The words hit him deeper than he expected. For a moment, no one spoke. The rain outside softened to a faint whisper against the windows. Evelyn stepped closer. I want to help you, not out of charity, not pity, but because brilliance shouldn't die in the shadows, and because your story matters. Holden shook his head. I don't want special treatment. This isn't special treatment, she replied. It's an investment. He frowned slightly. In what? In you? Silence stretched again, quiet, heavy, warm. Finally, Evelyn reached into her coat pocket and handed him a sealed envelope. He hesitated before opening it. Inside was a medical authorization form, stamped, signed, approved, and a note. Hazel Walker, full surgery cost covered. Today. Holden's knees nearly buckled. He grabbed the back of a chair, breathing hard as emotion surged through him. Shock, relief, gratitude so powerful it almost hurt. His voice cracked. Why would you do this? Evelyn looked at him with soft eyes. Because someone once rescued me when I was drowning, and because people like Professor Whitmore forget that genius comes from everywhere, not just polished halls. She touched his arm lightly. And because Hazel deserved a future. He pressed his hand over his mouth as tears blurred his vision. He tried to speak, but no sound came. Evelyn placed a small business card on the table. When Hazel is stable, we'll discuss your next steps. Research, teaching, fellowship options, anything you want. She paused. You're not trapped anymore. He nodded, trembling. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you. Evelyn gave a soft, rare smile. Go to your daughter. By late afternoon, the hospital was buzzing. Hazel lay in pre-op, tiny legs kicking beneath the blanket as Holden held her hand, telling her stories about brave astronauts and clever princesses who solved impossible puzzles. She smiled sleepily. Daddy, you look happy. He kissed her forehead. I am, sweetheart. Why? He swallowed. Because someone finally saw me. Hazel squeezed his hand. I always see you. The surgical team arrived to take her in. Holden watched her disappear behind the double doors, heart twisting with fear and hope battling inside him. The hours crawled. He paced the waiting room, drank terrible coffee. Saturday. Stood. Sat again. Rain streaked the windows as evening turned to night. His mind spiraled. What if the surgery failed? What if after everything he still lost her? Then the doors opened. The surgeon stepped out. Holden froze. The surgeon smiled. She made it. Hazel did beautifully. She's stable, Mr. Walker. Holden's legs gave out. He collapsed into the nearest chair, tears falling freely. Hands covered his face as relief crashed through him in violent waves. He whispered, Thank you, thank you. Hazel lived. His daughter lived. News traveled fast. By morning, the entire university had heard two things. The janitor who solved the impossible equation was actually Holden Walker, the prodigy who vanished years ago. A billionaire philanthropist had personally intervened on his behalf. Students debated it everywhere. Dorm rooms, group chats, dining halls, TikTok. Overnight, Holden became a legend. Professor Laurel, meanwhile, couldn't escape the storm. Her colleagues whispered. Students avoided her. The dean demanded a formal apology and an ethics review. For the first time in her life, Laurel felt small. She found herself outside Holden's hospital room 2 days later, clutching a bouquet she'd bought reluctantly. Holden stepped into the hallway when he saw her. Laurel's voice cracked immediately. I'm sorry. Her eyes brimmed. For everything. For how I treated you. For not recognizing you. For, she swallowed, for letting my ego get in the way of seeing your humanity. Holden studied her. She wasn't performing. She wasn't protecting her reputation. She was broken and healing. He nodded gently. We all lose ourselves sometimes. Laurel wiped her eyes. Can you forgive me? Holden didn't make her wait. Yes. Her breath stuttered. She nodded and left quietly, carrying both guilt and relief. A week later, Hazel was recovering beautifully. Holden sat at her bedside, watching her sleep peacefully for the first time in years. His phone buzzed. A message from Evelyn Ashbourne. Ready when you are. Let's rebuild the life you paused for, Hazel. Holden looked out the window at the Boston skyline. Buildings lit gold in the setting sun. Life buzzing below. Opportunities waiting in every glowing window. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel buried. He didn't feel forgotten. He didn't feel small. He felt possible. He placed a hand over Hazel's and whispered, We're going to be okay. Then, with a quiet breath, he allowed himself a truth he had not spoken in years. I'm coming back. And thousands of viewers would later echo the same sentiment in the comments. If you've ever been underestimated, tell us your story.